Thank you for coming through the show, Jessica. Is it Dewhurst or Dewhurst? I'm sure you're gonna tell us more.
It's Dewhurst.
You founded that Justice Desk at such a young age. As a white person as an activist in South Africa, it might come off a bit as a person who's different from a perspective of a South African who's a Black South African who's looking at you from a different
Mm,
landscape or viewpoint. It's different. Why being an activist at such a young age after 1994?
mm.
Um, and also being recognized globally by international institutions. It becomes a bit offish.
It
What
does.
personal experience shaped your passion for human rights and justice?
Yeah.
I'm sure
Okay.
you can just tell us a bit
Mm.
about your background and what the work that Justice Desk is doing, and maybe we can just go from there. I'm not sure if I'm,
Yeah, yeah, no, that sounds great. That sounds great.
yeah,
Hi, my name is Jessica Dewhurst. I'm a proud South African. I'm not going to tell you how old I am because I'm too old now. And yeah, I was born during the apartheid regime in South Africa. Um, and uh, and I think, well, I don't think I know. Growing up, I was always, told that, shortly after I was born, apartheid came to an end. And, a lot of people were talking about the freedom that we all have, and now we all have human rights and we're all equal. And I think that you need to be purposely trying to not see the injustice and the inequality that's still in South Africa and Africa today. The harm that was caused by colonization and the apartheid regime is still very much alive today. I wouldn't say that colonization has ended in Africa, it's continued. It just calls itself development or it calls itself other names. But growing up, it was incredibly obvious the privilege and the life that I lived because of the color of my skin. I am not the brightest person, but I got into every university I applied to. If I needed help with my homework, I could ask my parents because my parents are white, which means that they most likely went to school and good schools, so they could help me with my homework. I've never been worried that the lights wouldn't be on at night or we wouldn't have water or, I've never had to worry about things which the average South African has to worry about. Um, but then I'd go into society and people would say we're equal and we have to now compete equally and we need to, move on as a country because we've achieved what we set out to achieve and everything's good now. And looking around our country, it was just so obvious what a lie that was, that nothing is good now. Sure, the laws of apartheid have been abolished, but that doesn't mean that the lived reality of people of color in South Africa and the continent have changed, because it hasn't changed. Um, Fundamentally, our systems and our structures in our communities, in our schools, in the employment sector, um, even if you want to be an entrepreneur in the health sector, it's everything is set up so that white people will continue to thrive, and people of color are always seen as less than. And from a very young age, I think God absolutely blessed me by putting me in situations where I was introduced to the most incredible people. And these were everyday South Africans who were the greatest teachers of my life, who helped me realize what was deeply wrong in our country and how much race is a massive driver of that. And I think at first I was really angry. I was really angry at the world. And, I was angry with my parents. I was angry with, I kept going, how could this have happened? How could,
right.
that conversation as a white person when you go to your parents and you go to your family and go, how could you have been a part of something like that? How? Like it's such a disgraceful and disgusting thing. You just think, how? Um, and just having those conversations is just the most heartbreaking thing. And I remember just getting really depressed about it until one of my great role models in life said to me that he said these words and they transformed my life. And it was, Jessica, you can be angry at the world, or you can use your privilege to do something about it. And I think that's what I realized was that I felt like there was nothing about me that made me worthy of privilege in any way. I wasn't different fundamentally from my fellow South Africans. So there's no reason why I should have access to more and I should have more opportunities and more resources. And that made me so angry. And I think what he helped me realize as a very young child, I was 14 at the time. He said, he helped me direct that anger and say, listen, yes, it is what it is. You're white, which means you have privilege. But you could ignore it like most white South Africans do. You can get really angry, which a bunch of other South Africans do, or you can use it for something. Use it to change the system that disgusts you. And I think that was the moment that, God really helped direct my life to say, okay, if doors open because of the color of my skin, I need to make sure that when I'm in that room, I do everything I can to break this room, break this door, and make it accessible for all people. Um, I truly like my ancestry is the British, the OG colonizers, and I when I go into communities and one of my friends, my dear friends, is a Sangoma, and she often speaks to her ancestors. And I remember once she said to me, which would I like her to channel my ancestors? And I said, please don't, because my ancestors are probably not the nicest people. But
Yeah.
um, despite that, despite how I got to South Africa, which is in really horrendous ways, I'm so thankful to be a South African and to be someone who was born on this continent because I believe that it's the most incredible place in the world. There's a saying that says, you're not born in Africa, Africa's born in you. And I really think that that is the case with me. I think God helped open my eyes and is still opening my eyes every single day, helping me learn, helping me unlearn, and really commanding me to use every breath that I have to fight for justice because I do not believe that any black or colored person or any person of color is less in any way than I am. And I need to fight until my dying breath and use every ounce of privilege or power that I have to make sure that I make a dent in the system that is stacked up against people of color. And so I think
Sure.
God led me down this path.
Yeah, it's very interesting how politics is ruled by the elites because you mentioned a great point when you said after 1994, black people went into power, ANC/ANC, and we thought the ANC was actually about the whole rules and policy and regulations that had to be um, extracted from, or removed from all this, the system that's what put in place to actually liberate the black society and but you find that all these BEE rules, they're actually amplifying or glorifying the people that are in power in politics. It's funny how the system works that the people in power or the rich people are becoming more richer and the poor are
Mm,
depending more on grants. So not actually, it's a great philosophy when you're trying to integrate or the massive thing that is blown or spread in the media about saying oh, South Africa is Ubuntu.
yeah.
But is it really Ubuntu when the
Mm,
poor are only focused on getting the social grants and the middle class is only focused on their social background, near
mm,
family members, but they're not entirely focused on the country as a whole. The rich are
yeah.
only getting richer, and it's a
Mm.
fascinating conversation. I want to hear your thoughts on how we can actually start to remove politics, if it's possible to remove politics as it is ingrained in our society mind state. But we cannot remove politics. Can you remove politics? Can we find a solution in that manner?
Yeah. I mean, I think we definitely can. I think one of the big problems when we got our democracy as a country was, you mentioned the word integration. And I think that's part of the problem is that our government took over a Western style government and just continued running the country in very Western white ways. And I think that's fundamentally the first mistake that we made as a country. We should have embraced Pan-Africanist values. We should have actually said, this is an African country. Let's look at our values. Let's look at our roots. Let's look at how we traditionally have organized as a society, as a community, and not just be proud of that, but implement a lot of that. And I think that we didn't do that in South Africa. We immediately said, okay, white government, black people will step in and we'll run it. But I don't think that's how it's meant to be. I think capitalism is fundamentally the problem with the world. And I think that if we continue to run a country in a capitalistic way, which I believe is very un-African, nothing's going to work. Because, like you say, the rich will just get richer, the poor will just get poorer. And because of racial inequality in our country, it means that just people of color are going to get poorer, while predominantly white people and a few black people are going to get richer. But capitalism does not lead to equality at all. Capitalism doesn't lead to justice. All it leads to is this massive gap between people, between the rich and the poor. So one of the first things, I'm incredibly blessed that I get to travel the African continent constantly and just learn from so many people and be blessed to just, wow, encounter people in the amazing history and culture and just what people are doing for the continent today. And I remember thinking to myself that, South Africa, we say we came up with the word Ubuntu, right? But I see Ubuntu practiced more in other African countries than I see it practiced in South Africa. I think that we have a lot to learn from our fellow African countries. The commitment and love and sense of community is at a completely another level. I also think that it's because we are constantly striving to be a Western country, a white country. We're constantly trying to do things like people in America and Europe do it. And I don't know why we're doing that, because again, we're not a Western country. We're an African country. And I think African values and African way of doing things is what we should be pursuing. I think, when we started, the ANC was a very Pan-Africanist socialist, party. Um, and um,
Sure.
and I think that when they came into power, instead of changing how we run government, they just conformed to how the government was already being run. And so I think the only result that possibly can be is a capitalist system that's fundamentally broken. And so what I would say to people is, number one, we need to, part of the great successes, but also just great evils of colonization and apartheid, is that we managed to convince people, particularly African people, that being African is not good. African ideas are not good ideas. African efforts are not good efforts. And so, therefore, an African way of running a country would not be good. And I truly think we still believe that. Because if we didn't, why aren't we implementing the Pan-African values and ideals that we believed in before apartheid ended? We look in countries like Burkina Faso and the amazing work that's happening there, in Nigeria, and like so many other countries across Africa are taking a stand and saying, we're going to run this by fully embracing Ubuntu and fully embracing our values and how we want to run our African nation as proudly African people. But in South Africa, I feel like we've lost our way a bit. And I think we can learn a lot from our brothers and sisters and gender neutral family across the continent in really learning. We need to find again what it means to be South African, what it means to be proud of being an African, and connect more with our fellow African countries. I think South Africans don't often actually engage or travel across to other countries or learn about other countries. On our continent, we know a lot about white people and white history and white, countries, but it's very rare that we know a lot of negative things about other African countries. We have a lot of stereotypes about each other. But at the end of the day, we're so much stronger together. There's so much we can learn from each other. There's so much to be proud of being an African person. Wow.
Sure.
I just don't, I think what we should do is we have a lot more work to do in unlearning what apartheid and colonialism taught us as South
Yeah,
Africans.
I wanted to change the narrative a bit and let's talk about this great book called The Capitalist Nigger. but I don't want to talk about that in the whole narrative. I'm not talking about, I just want to put it in a way that we're discussing um, why are we exporting more minerals instead of, just
Mm.
creating products for ourselves,
Mm.
creating African brands for ourselves and stop wearing these Nike brands, these, yeah, yeah. Why are we not
Yeah.
supporting more fire, you know, more fire energy drinks? Why are we
And
always
I think that's because of this colonial mindset that we have. We think that if it's
so
from America, it's better for some reason.
so yeah. So the book actually talks about the spiderweb economy of how
Yeah.
the Hinduism society is gonna come here and create products or create shops and they become supermarkets because they're always going to buy to their societies, right? And you as a black Indian South African, right? You're going to go to those shops, whatever, and go and send your money there whilst you're not investing in your own spider web where you can actually attract money for your own economy and ecosystem. That's why I think the education or the miseducated people are getting super poor and why the rich are getting more richer. And I think with so many resources that we have here in South Africa, we're not actually taking them into use. And I think it's so much unfair, but I think there has been progress a little bit, maybe not much. But I want to hear your thoughts on how can the youth, hold power structures like the elites that are doing to actually um, be accountable without being consumed by the weight of the injustice.
Yeah. It's incredibly hard. Injustice is the most soul-destroying thing. And I think when you fight for it, it's not something that happens overnight. I was once someone told me that, that the fruits of my labor will only exist after I've died. Someone said that to me once, and I was like, yo, that's depressing. But it's so true. The work that we're doing now, the foundation that we're building now for justice, it's future generations who are going to enjoy that. But I feel like that is such an honor and such a privilege to be able to build the South Africa that South Africans and Africans deserve. Um, and I do think it's very heartbreaking when you're confronted by people who keep trying to push us down, people who keep trying to separate us, whether it's culture, language, tribe, with, provincial, there's like beef between Cape Town and Joburg. And, like everyone's kind of, we're constantly dividing ourselves. And every time we do it, it drives me insane because I keep thinking this is an apartheid strategy again. If, they can conquer us if they divide us. And so I would say to young people, first you need to know who you are and you need to know what you believe in. You need to know our history and not just South African history, but African history. We need to we need to be clear as to what we believe in so that we know what we're fighting for. And if you truly believe in human rights, if you truly believe that we are equal, just based off the fact that we are human beings, then it should be very clear that the way that we're running our country is very wrong and that we have a lot more work to do. I would say that when it gets tough, surround yourself with like-minded people. I would say give yourself breaks. I just came from a bit of a break and I'm feeling much better. um, give yourself a bit of a break. This work can be so hard, and sometimes we feel like if we take a second of a break, people, everything's going to collapse. And I think we also need to trust God that when it's our time for a break, He will send other warriors to do the good fights in your place and vice versa. But surround yourself by like-minded people. Take some time to know who you are. What are your values? Why are you proud to be an African? And I think spend a significant amount of time on unlearning a lot of the nonsense that we've been taught and that we're still being taught today in our schools and in our politics. They're trying to convince us that this is how we are as South Africans. This is not. Um, and I think that, our politicians have, you know, pulled the wool over our eyes and think that they have the advantage because we're suffering so much, we don't care what's going on in politics. But I think I think we need to take off those blindfolds. I think we need to recognize that we have the power to build the continent and the country that we deserve. But it all comes down to, what do you believe? Do you believe we're equal? Do you love your fellow human being? It's not a difficult question, yes or no. But if you pick yes, it means that you need to be ready to fight. It means you need to be ready to sacrifice. But it also means you have the honor of being a part of a movement of people who are transforming this continent for the people of this continent. And I think that that is such a gift and such a blessing. So injustice, it's not easy. It's cuck, it's hard. I don't know if I'm allowed to swear, but it's not easy. I've struggled with depression, PTSD, I've struggled, and people struggle with way more than what I struggle with. But it can feel like, you win one thing and then another big thing hits you, and you try and you try and it's so hard. But we will eventually succeed. And when we succeed, we've succeeded forever. When we change our systems as a society, how we function, how we engage with each other, how we treat each other, if we succeed in making that one that's rooted in a culture of human rights, that changes forever. That will last forever. And that means our job is done. Now we just need to upkeep that peace and that justice. So I think it's about thinking in perspective. Again, surround yourself by like-minded people. Who are you? What do you believe in? Why are you proud to be African? And how can we all play our role by holding our government accountable and holding the corporate capital world accountable for what they've done to our continent, and not being afraid to take our own path, like so many other African countries are doing. They're saying, this is scary. We're saying, by European influence, by American influence, we're actually going to invest in African countries. When we trade, it'll be with our fellow African countries because we want to boost this continent. That's a very scary thing, I think, for any leader to do. But we need to have faith in ourselves, and we need to stop thinking that if it comes from other parts of the world, then it will work. But if it comes from us, it won't. It's nonsense. Africa is full of the most incredible minds the world has ever seen, the most amazing ideas, the most amazing passion and energy. Why don't we believe in ourselves? And so I would say, sit down, ask yourself those questions as a South African and as a person of this continent, and answer those questions to yourself. Do you really believe in humanity? Do you believe we're equal? And do you believe in Africa? If you do, it's time to get to work.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for this amazing interview. I was going to touch on so many varied concepts about, why politicians are not sending their children to public schools, public hospitals, clinics, and but I think it's important to start having this conversation and start actually trying to deconstruct so many concepts that are actually bullshit, and
Mm.
understand where we're going as a country, as the newer, younger generation and the younger generation that's going to come. When you're going to create this platform, that's the reason why this platform is here in the first place. And my passion about entrepreneurs, about Black African entrepreneurs, and how they can
Mm.
actually access the market, and start building systems for ourselves. And I think it's very important to start having a say,
Mm.
to whoever and say, start to and I want to make an impact in some way. And I thank you for contributing to the show. And I
Oh,
think we
cool.
can pardon?
I love what you said there. It's time to start building the systems ourselves. Like let's change how we do things. If our economy is not built for Black African entrepreneurs, then let's change the economy. Do you know what I mean? Like it
Thank you.
must stop fitting into the molds that other people have built for us. Africans are not meant for molds. We're not meant to fit in. Africans are meant to stand out. Africans are meant to do things in the uniquely African way, and that is amazing. So like you say, like I love that you said that because I think it's so true. If the system's not working, it doesn't mean we're what's broken. It means the system's broken. And we need to do everything we can to make sure that we recognize where we come from. We're standing on the shoulders of giants, people who quite literally gave their lives. Generations and generations of people on this continent have fought like warriors to protect what it means to be African, to protect the people of this continent, and to protect the values and the goodness that comes with it. And, you know, people of African descent are quite literally descendants of those warriors. And isn't that incredible that we get to continue this work? And I'm just because I'm blessed to have been born in this country, I get to join in on that, on this incredible work and this incredible mission that we are still fighting today to protect this continent and to build a continent where we are proudly African and not ashamed to do things differently. And I think that we need to embrace that. We need to be proud of that. And we need to really practice the Ubuntu that we preach. It's not just a slogan for like tourist gifts and stuff. We have Ubuntu everywhere. But I bet if you go to young people now and you say, hey, what does it mean? What does it truly mean in here? That needs to be a real answer. And a lot of people, I think, have lost sight of what it means and what it should mean for us. And so I think for all of us as young South Africans and young Africans, you'll be proud of who you are, be proud of where you came from, but be serious about where we're going and be serious about the role you're going to play in where we're going. Because we can't do this alone. We're powerful in numbers, and there's a lot of us, which is awesome. So educate yourself, be open to change, and embrace this beautiful continent that we are blessed to be born in. And if we do that, I believe that our future is incredibly bright as a continent and as young people in the country.
Thank you so much for coming through to the interview. And yeah, I appreciate you having me on the show.
Of course. Thank you for having me. Thanks for the invite.